Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We commence the proceedings with our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out a virtual assembly line of wacky, astonishing, damnable, and ultimately revealing things uttered by politicians in the chattering class. It's all about the schools now and whether to reopen them come late August and September. It's the latest front in the war over COVID-19 that's become almost 100% political. The right wants to open schools. The left says the sky is falling, that sending kids to school as their parents return to work poses a clear and present danger to both the kids and teachers, who are increasingly pushing the same frightful narrative as the politicians on the left, who want to stall the recovery of the economy because they believe it will hurt Trump on November 3rd, perhaps fatally. See, everything you see and hear from now till November 3rd is about the election. Listen to the nation's most powerful Democrat, Nancy Pelosi, spreading the COVID fear.
Going back to school presents the biggest risk for the spread of the coronavirus. They ignore science and they ignore governance in order to make this happen. If there are CDC guidelines, they should be requirements.
Fearful suburban housewives may tremble at the thought of their kids going back to school, but the problem is that what Pelosi just said is not true. Shocker there. Listen to Dr. Scott Atlas, head of healthcare policy for the prestigious conservative think tank, the Hoover Institution, put the lie to the left's claims that kids returning to school is the height of danger.
That's just completely wrong and contrary to all the science. And when I say all the science, I'm talking about science from all over the world, not just in the United States, but Switzerland, Sweden, Canada, France, the Netherlands, Australia, Asia. It's really totally contrary to the science. And here's the science. I'm not sure how many times it has to be said, but the risk to children from this disease for fatality is nearly zero. And this has been proven by contact tracing all over the world, by studies on these kids. This is like really ludicrous.
But that hasn't stopped the leftists from trying to shut down as much of the country as possible again. And let me tell you, folks, it ain't going to happen in a single red state. But if some blue state governors somehow think further restricting people's freedom will help them beat Trump and Republicans, they will certainly consider it. And all of this, of course, is happening against a backdrop of revolt in the streets, where almost none of the protesters, rioters, and looters are wearing masks or social distancing. But that's no big deal to the left, because they say these protests are more important than the risk of getting or spreading COVID. But everyone else needs to be controlled and regulated. Meanwhile, the final election-fueled assault on Trump from the far left is just now ramping up, with the election just about 15 weeks away. Allow me to offer three prominent attacks. First, Hawaii Senator Mazie Hirono, discarding the more opaque terms deplorable and irredeemable favored by Hillary Clinton in favor of a more transparent description of Trump and those who support him.
He has a base of supporters who are very anti-immigrant and white supremacists. That's a lot of his base.
So old Mazie says a lot of Trump supporters are white supremacists. Now, I'm wondering if a lot means more or less than the half of Trump supporters Hillary Clinton described as deplorable and irredeemable. Hillary's on the sidelines this time, but issued a remarkably tone-deaf warning this week about the man who brought an unceremonious end to her political career 4 years ago.
I think it is a fair point to raise as to whether or not, if he loses, he's going to go quietly or not. And we have to be ready for that.
Think about what she just said, and then recall how she pulled out every excuse in the book, including that Trump stole the election, and it certainly wasn't her fault that she lost in 2016. But the heat's been turned up to a full boil at Trump-deranged media outlets like CNN and MSNBC as black militants control the streets after dark in cities across the nation and demonize people for being white. A guy named Jason Johnson went on MSNBC and had the chutzpah to accuse Trump of being racially divisive and then said there's only one possible way Trump could win.
This is Trump's modern Southern strategy. You know, his entire strategy going forward is there's an us versus them. And the them is anybody black, anybody brown, anybody queer, anybody poor, anybody who doesn't worship at the almighty temple of Trump. And he's going to try and justify overt actions of violence as being politically necessary. He's losing the white vote. And if Joe Biden only gets about 40% of the white vote, he doesn't even have to hit Obama numbers. Trump is going to get wiped out in all of the states that he barely won in 2016. Joe Biden, all he's got to do is sit back. The Republicans in a circular firing squad at this point, and all he's got to do is walk into the White House. The only way that Donald Trump can win this fall is if he cheats.
Mark that down, because if Trump does win, even if by a large margin, you can count on the left refusing to accept the result, the very thing they accused Trump of, because Trump cheated. In other words, just like 2016, when the Russians put him in office, there's no legitimate path for Donald Trump to get reelected. But one wonders how Joe Biden will be able to close the deal when you've got New York, for one, in a meltdown, defunding the police as violence continues largely unabated and the nation looks on. This week, a legitimate peace march in Brooklyn was ruined by thugs who attacked the police unprovoked. And then there's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez actually defending people rioting and looting.
So why is this uptick in crime happening? Well, let's think about it. Do we think this has to do with the fact that there's record unemployment in the United States right now? The fact that people are at a level of economic desperation that we have not seen since the Great Recession? Maybe this has to do with the fact that people aren't paying their rent and are scared to pay their rent. And so they go out and they need to feed their child and they don't have money. So you maybe they're put in a position where they feel like they either need to shoplift some bread or go hungry that night.
That is exactly the kind of statement that voters will be considering as they enter the privacy of the voting booth on November 3rd. Finally, as the likes of AOC cheer on the destruction of symbols and institutions of Western civilization and statues of great Americans are toppled across the land, another cultural icon finally bit the dust this week at the hands of Daniel Snyder, owner of the Washington Redskins, who once declared that he would never surrender the name of his team. But after relentless pressure from giant left-wing corporate sponsors, he relinquished the name which defined the franchise for 88 years. Mark One Wolf Yancey, Apache Indian and part of the Native American Guardians Association, was asked if getting rid of the name Redskins has been a priority for Native Americans.
Absolutely not. I've been a lifelong Redskin fan. I grew up in the 80s, in the heyday of all of our Super Bowl championships. There's a sense in Washington D.C. that the Redskin could do no wrong, and there was never a time in my life where the word Redskin was ever used in any type of derogatory way.
And in looking around the internet for how regular football fans are viewing the surrender of the Redskins name, I heard a lot of insults directed at owner Dan Snyder, but this one by a black guy on a YouTube channel called simply Truth probably had the best one.
The whole thing about racism comes from a lot of quote-unquote woke folks that don't even watch football, okay? These latte sippers in the ivory tower in the sky don't care about football. They don't watch football. They don't like football. They probably would want for football to be abolished.
latte sippers in their ivory towers in the sky, joined at the hip with criminals running wild in the streets. What an alliance.